every time a customer comes to the marketplace and says, I would like to buy X at Y, or I would like to sell X at Y, that is an option that they are giving to the marketplace for free. If you wanted that deal from the market, they would charge you for it.
Now, I know right now, technology and finance are making news. We have AI, which is continuing to forge forward, and it's growing at accelerated speeds. Finance too, they're kind of intersecting where those stocks are becoming, worth quite a bit of money. Now, I know your background says that you are a mathematician and your expertise is in computational math, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Now, can you give us a little bit of your background and what kind of got you interested in this area?
Yeah, sure. Well, I went to UVA, studied engineering in the last century, and when I got out, I needed a job, and tech jobs were sort of cheap and plentiful. The dot-com boom was reaching its peak, basically, year 2000. And so I got into that, and then the engineering ethics training kicks in that if you're a professional, you should actually understand what it is you're talking about. And so I started digging in, not just to learning the programming languages that were being used at the company I was working at, but also the justifications and reasons for the decisions that led to the construction of those programming languages, how they're properly used, and so on. And that is computational math. We kind of skip over that for the most part. People learn computation, but we sort of learn it as a recipe. It's like, okay, you need to add. This is how you add. Now you're done. There are many, many different ways in which people can add, and some are more efficient than others, and some are contextual, and so on. So you can add things geometrically by appending two line segments together, for example, or you can add things symbolically by doing the thing that we learn in school about, how to memorize the relationships of single-digit numbers and how every once in a while you have to carry the one. If you do that in binary, it turns out that the logic gates and in OR can also be referred to as what's called half adders, where and basically records whether or not a one carry has to happen, and OR carry figures out like what values go into the next step of a system. And so by combining and OR gates, by basically splitting addition into a half, we can form many of the kinds of logical connectives that exist in philosophy and computers.
Oh, that's pretty cool that there's a correlation between those two things. And I know can you give us like an introduction about the coordinated discovery market? That's something that I know you're working on. How will that impact the marketplace?
Well, so the coordinated discovery market is essentially built around a new kind of communication mechanism to move market information around. And it does so by splitting the deal not into the traditional two parts of a buyer and seller, but into three parts with an overseer, and that's what the mechanism is. So the three parts are the producer, the consumer, and the negotiator. And what this allows is, rather than having a marketplace that is basically a bunch of individuals that are all competing with every other individual in the marketplace, it becomes individuals who only have to compete with other people that are playing the same kind of role in the marketplace that they are. So producers are competing with other producers to make as much stuff at the prices available as possible. Consumers are competing with their consumers to find valuable uses for as much stuff as the prices are available. And negotiators are competing with other negotiators to find prices that cause production and consumption to coordinate well with one another. And by doing this, you just radically reduce the amount of time and energy and money it costs to operate a marketplace. And since right now our markets consume in excess of $1 trillion a year for their operation. Radically reducing that cost basically goes straight to the bottom line of our economy. Those costs are what are known as dead weight losses. If we can do it for only $500 billion a year, for example, then our economy boosts by $500 billion in just that first year. And whatever advantages were involved in that, in the next year, not only do you have the old $500 billion coming back around again, but you have the growth in a new growing economy of the last 500 billion and so on. The last time there was a significant upgrade in market design was when we adopted the markets that we presently use, and that was the Renaissance. It was about 800 years ago, and the economic influxes that were brought about by this market design are why the northern Italian city-states were able to fund Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Cardano, and the explorations of art, architecture, math, science, and history that laid the foundations of the modern world.
So this is something new, like this, once this is kind of put into the market, this is like a new way of doing things, basically.
Effectively, yes. It matches up to a lot of the ways, we still have people that make commodity product. We still have people that use commodity product. It's the same commodity product. We have an entire infrastructure built around transporting, train car loads or truck car loads of things. I don't have radically better solutions for moving money around or stuff around. This is just the market operation itself. So it's one component, but a critical component within a broader economy.
So it makes it more effective, basically. You're not like losing a lot of time, essentially money in areas where you could save that with this.
Absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned AI. We've been integrating AI into our marketplaces for decades now. Even generative AI has been operating in the markets for a couple of decades almost at this point. But other kinds of AI systems are responsible for things you might have heard of, like high-frequency trading and electronic trading. The 89 financial crash was actually a flash crash. It was a result of robotic trades cascading out of control. So we've had markets that are being primarily operated by machines for longer than most people have been alive at this point. And they aren't designed to the extent that they are designed. Back in the Renaissance, they weren't thinking about what if one day computers existed and we could, have messages moving at the speed of light. They weren't trying to solve that problem. I have effectively reconsidered the problem space in light of those capabilities, and this solves that problem.
Another thing that is being talked about is that Texas, the new Texas stock exchange. What are your thoughts on that? Anything that you could add to that? Do you think it's something that's going to be beneficial?
I think that it's quite likely to be a boondoggle. I'm perfectly happy to talk with them and, sort of offer licensure for a system that could give them a future. However, right now, they are proposing markets that operate in the same way that other markets do. They have some micro differences, and they would presumably have some inroads in getting listings from Texas companies, which are not inconsequential. I believe SpaceX has just been formally shifted to being a Texas company. But at the end of the day, the existing markets operate off of a value proposition related to the liquidity and deal flow that they can manage. And this comes down to something called the implicit order book value. So markets are largely driven through options values. If you have the option to buy or sell something that might be worthless to you, if you have the option to buy a Lamborghini for $400 billion, well, everybody has that option. Lamborghinis aren't that expensive. But if you had an option to buy, a shipping container full of wheat for 40 cents, that would be incredibly valuable to you because it costs a lot more than that for most people. Every time a customer comes to the marketplace and says, I would like to buy X at Y, or I would like to sell X at Y, that is an option that they are giving to the marketplace for free. If you wanted that deal from the market, they would charge you for it. And so the set value, the sum value of all of those positive deals is the order book value, the implicit order book value of the marketplace. And so intra-market competition, like the New York Stock Exchange versus the Texas Stock Exchange, is going to be pretty much decided by implicit order book values. And unless the people running the Texas Stock Exchange can get sort of the entire S&P 500 to suddenly all switch for reasons that don't make any economic sense, the existing exchanges have a lot of inertia and staying power because people want to go to where the best price discovery is. The best price discovery is going to be wherever the money already is. And so while they've already spent in excess of $100 million just to be able to stand up and be able to operate a global exchange, which is what it costs, unless they have another $1 trillion+ that they can quite literally flush down a toilet, they would effectively have to give that money away in order to attract the kinds of volume that would enable them to overcome the existing implicit order book value of competitive markets. There are some exceptions. NASDAQ was able to carve out a niche by explicitly addressing an entirely new market segment that the existing market wasn't addressing at all. But the Texas market does not, that I'm aware, have anything like that. There's no specific segment that the existing financial industry is completely ignored that they intend to sort of pick up and become the champions of. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd welcome their communication, and I'd like to help turn them into successes. But what's in public right now is that they've just wasted 9 figures, and unless they've got 12 figures on kind of a coin flip, that's just what's going to happen.
Going to be kind of a tall order to kind of get it, because you got to go to the next step, which is attracting those companies basically, and being able...
Exactly. And attracting them is not in their interests, because you won't be able, until after all of the companies and all of the customers have switched, their prices aren't going to be as accurate. And they need those accurate prices to be able to access bond markets and other forms of funding and so on. That's kind of where they're sitting right now.
And now another thing I wanted to get your input on is now what, we're going into 2025. What are some of the changes we might see in the exchange market for commodities and things like that?
Well, basically what we've been seeing is the system is being driven by the technological innovation. So as we see AI becoming even more prevalent and even more pervasive, we're going to see a greater amount of noise injection into the marketplaces, which is going to cause total transaction costs to increase even further. Now, that's not likely to affect the fees very much. In fact, there's an effort. It's not likely to hit its stride in 2025, but it's not impossible to try to get the markets to, rather than trading 1 million times a second at millisecond or microsecond timescales, to trade 10 million times a second or at 100 nanoseconds timescales. And if advances in that are actually rolled out, you should probably expect to see some sort of lowering of fee per transaction basis, just to encourage people to use all that extra space that will be freed up. But that doing something like that is going to increase the information load to the markets by probably more than an order of magnitude, which would also increase the costs of operation. And so it would mean that the entire system would have to become much, much more expensive in order to continue to function. And that's what we've been seeing. I'm aware of groups that are working on effectively distributed AI systems, trying to create what amounts to hedge fund or high frequency trading capabilities that would be distributed across the entire marketplace. That again would greatly increase the amount of noise and cost in the markets. And so I would expect that, as for the last 4 or 5 decades at this point, 2025 will see markets become less and less functional. All of us suffer from that.
That's crazy, because someone was telling me, I guess AI takes an incredible amount of energy. Like, I was trying to understand.
That's another issue too. Yes, AI has sort of 2 phases. There's the training phase, which is what's getting a lot of note, and that takes enormous amounts of energy and relatively huge complexes because there's a lot of computation going in. But then once you've done the training, then what you get out is a computer program, which can be quite efficient. And in fact, you can, as part of the training, you can train for very high efficiency. And so that's at least part of what's going to be going on. Right now, the markets take more than 1/1,000,000th of a second to process trades when they occur. So for most microseconds, there's gigabytes of people that want to buy and want to sell, but there's no crosses. Everybody that wants to buy for prices that are lower than everybody that wants to sell at. But when the cross does happen, it takes several microseconds for the clearance algorithm to actually run. And so the market effectively has to shut down for those timescales. Another issue is that the total amount of information that the market can actually absorb isn't necessarily the same amount that they can be brought to the marketplace. So strategies that exist are to pump plausible looking trades that you have no intention of actually executing to overwhelm the system, to then be able to analyze how the system will prioritize which trades are coming in so that you can effectively arrange the nature of the market trading structure to your own advantage. And so AI will become increasingly sophisticated at coming up with ways to generate these sorts of very low-cost noise injections and analyze what kinds of advantages would exist. That will, of course, be a competitive engagement and also probably a cooperative engagement in some cases. And those are the kinds of things that will cause the markets to further degrade in their effectiveness.
And now for you, what are some of the services that you provide right now, and what are you doing, as far as in the market and just trying to, I know you were talking about the coordinated discovery market. What are some of the other services that you're providing?
Well, that's pretty much it. I'm an expert on market design, and I have a great deal of historical knowledge on the nature of marketplaces and the combination of market design, historical knowledge, and sort of underlying computational strategy. I can provide advice. For example, I could have told the Texas people that unless they had a completely new form of technology or another $1 trillion to burn, that they probably could have saved themselves 100 and whatever, 30, $40 million and just gone and done something productive instead. But my primary offering is, in fact, the coordinated discovery market mechanism. And there are a handful of projects attempting to get markets off the ground, either markets or indices or other kind of related systems that would exploit the technology.
That's great. And if people wanted to find out more about you and your company and what you do, what would be the best place for them to kind of look for you? And
Well, the best way is to reach out to me directly. I've got an email address, noahphealy@yahoo.com, but there is a website, coredisc.com, that has more details. I've been doing this for long enough. You can actually ask most of the generative AIs about what coordinated discovery markets are, and they're not perfect, but they're not bad in my experience. And so, simple Google search will pull up hundreds of articles, podcasts, and so on of me talking about this to a wide variety of groups and people.
Well, that's great. So hopefully now, if you I know you have the patent, right, and that's pending. You're saying, right? It was pending.
I got a notice of acceptance in 2020, and under the law, if you get a notice of acceptance and you pay the fee, the only way to not have the patent be granted is for them to do a rejection, which requires them to have an appropriate level person sign a letter saying that. So there's a section of the law, 101, 102, 103, up through like 105 or 107 or something. There's a bunch of different levels of objection, if you will. 101 that's the heart attack. That's absolutely unpatentable, something like that. Only 101 objections are allowed to generate a rejection. They never provided a rejection letter for that particular acceptance. We asked them about it. They said, we don't know what's going on yet. We're going to get back to you. 4 months later, they came up with a 101 objection, which was mathematically unsupportable. Effectively, it was a claim that 1 and 2 were the same number, or that multiplying by 1 and multiplying by 100,000 were identical concepts. It took some work for me to explain to my attorneys how insane their claims were, and they then put together the letter, which generated my second notice of acceptance in 2022. That was then rejected 3 weeks later. This time, according to the law, but you're not really allowed to cover up for previous things in future things. And sort of informally, we were informed that something was coming down from on high. The people we were allowed to talk to were out of the decision loop and didn't understand what was going on. So I appealed that to the patent board. The patent board decided not to address the illegal behavior of the patent office, which under the law means that they actually have agreed that they were behaving illegally, and that they have to give me the patent, although they didn't, and more or less repeated both of the two previous nonsensical claims on really no evidence at all. And so I am now filing a pro se motion, or have filed a pro se motion to the Federal Circuit Court to have a judge decide whether or not incompetence, lying, and criminality are to be expected out of the federal government, or they're not okay. Hope to get justice.
But once if you get this settled or whatever, we could see this in the future in the market. Like if this is something that we might see as far as advancements.
Yeah. Well, having the patent would make available certain kinds of intellectual property exchange. It could be sold. That might be something that's more interesting. We may well see it in the market, even if it's never patented, because like I said, overseas it is open source, and there are a handful of groups operating overseas that are attempting to get markets into place. One of the interesting historical facts about the generation of the markets that we currently have is that they were able to economically take over the world even without a military or political backing of any significant kind. So in the 1200s, when this technology that we currently operate our economy on was developed, the economic capital of the Mediterranean was Constantinople, because it controlled access to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, as well as land access from Europe to the Middle East. It was pretty much the most important spot on Earth, and had been for thousands of years, and has been for centuries since. Their economy was essentially just taken by city-states like Venice, Naples, Genoa, and so on, And it is because of that fact that those places were then able to support things like the Medici family and the Renaissance and all the other developments that we see. The economic center of gravity then went to Northern Europe as Spain started bringing the New World silver in. The treasure fleets were actually landing in Amsterdam and the Low Countries, and so they adopted that same economic technology, but they had a lot more money flowing around, and so they became kind of the world capital. And then the British were able to take over by a combination of innovating even more money by getting fractional reserve banking off the ground in a sustainable way, and having the Industrial Revolution happen, which led to their enormous economic output and global colonization, and sort of the English-speaking diaspora. And so the reason that effectively the entire planet right now is on one economic system is because of that, because competing with this economic system has been historically impossible, because you can't beat the implicit order book of an established market without throwing an enormous amount of money at the problem, and nobody's found a way to throw more money at a problem than fractional reserve banking can. This provides another way, and so if FarmNets in East Africa gets their coffee index off the ground, we could and in fact should expect that would also have a rapidly expanding scope of action as producers, consumers, and informed speculators around the world realize that there's people getting much, much better deals than them, and they too would like to make a lot more money and have a lot more security, and start switching en masse.